Silent Bones by Rachel Lynch. Read by Clare Kissane. Prologue. The joke wasn't funny. Not tonight. His habitual clowning around was no longer a source of camouflage that kept him distant and safe. He felt naked and exposed without it. It was tight in the small dark space, and he struggled to get a full breath. Things had gone too far. The rising panic in his chest told him so. His head hurt, and he sensed a sticky substance around his temples, running into his eyes and his mouth. He tasted his own fear. In the blackness, the petrol-like fluid clung to his skin. It didn't smell the same as the grime from the lake. Clarity, which had taken its time to dawn on him, now gripped his senses, and he knew, beyond the doubts denying his reality, that it wasn't sweat either. It was just that his reasonable brain didn't want to admit the truth. It was swelteringly hot in the confined cavity. He calculated that they'd been driving for some while, over bumpy tracks, round tight bends and up and down hills. They weren't in town. Of that, at least, he was sure. He hadn't heard any other traffic for some time, and they weren't constrained by junctions, stops and lights. It was oily black, and he was completely sightless. His upper body tightened further, and he shouted out, but his throat was raspy and sore from the exertion. He heard a radio, and the volume was turned up, because everybody loved the tune, including him. The police had released Every Breath You Take, and he listened as Sting's voice comforted him. Nothing could go bad when Sting sang. It was a love song, or so his mum said. She was in love with the singer, and the knowledge made him feel awkward. Women her age shouldn't think like that. Well, that's what his dad said. His parents' faces caused unwelcome feelings to rise up in his already compressed torso. They hung in the gloom as his body rattled around the boot space. He'd let them down. If only he'd taken his jacket off, like he'd been asked to, he wouldn't be so hot. And maybe he wouldn't be here right now. The car hit a large bump, and it jarred his back, and he cried out once more. But they ignored him. The fur inside his jacket rubbed against his cheek, as if it knew that he needed consolation in that moment. He could get another jacket, he thought despondently, as his fingers wriggled around the material where it had been cut. It might take him a whole year to save up for one, but he could do it. He'd take an extra job at the working men's club in town. Legally, he couldn't serve booze until he was 18 next year, but no one would tell if he pulled the odd pint for his dad's mates. His mind was made up, and the plan was a welcome distraction as he rolled painfully in the shrouded shadows of the tiny metal chamber. In his wild imagination, it became a tomb. The hopeless claustrophobia and the deep, dark terror was only relieved by the occasional nod to the outside world, as periodic light penetrated the dimness. Tiny cracks in the metalwork focused his eyes as they became accustomed to the endless, crushing murkiness. A momentary flash of illumination confirmed what he already suspected. His head cracked against the hard interior and made contact with the rough carpet lining. And he knew that the oily substance sticking to his clothes wasn't sweat, or mud, or fuel, but his own blood. Chapter 1. Kelly Porter backed her car out of the driveway, and she headed into Pooley Bridge as its residents slowly woke up to another day. The drive to her office in Penrith was a mere 20 minutes. Some days she fancied the route past the great mansion of Thirlmere and through the tiny hamlet of Stainton. But today she decided upon the narrower road to the east of the village, through Stockbridge, by way of some diversion. Her mind needed distraction, and negotiating the early morning tourists in their rented vehicles heading to the hills gave her ample time to decompress. Not that she needed a rest from her daughter, or the domestic goings-on brought about by a blended family. But the demands of an 11-month-old, as well as Johnny's teenage daughter, were sometimes overwhelming, and space was something that was essential for her sense of humour to survive. She checked herself in the windscreen mirror, gently placing a strand of sun-kissed auburn hair behind her ear. 40 suited her. Some would say she was lucky. Her partner, Johnny, enjoyed the luxury of part-time volunteer work with the mountain rescue teams, and so he was a hands-on dad, available to fill in around her more structured role as head of the serious crime unit for the Northern Lakes. It wasn't an aspersion on his lifestyle, it was just that his routine was more fluid, and thus suited to the needs of the growing family. He could take shifts around Kelly's more formal arrangements, which required her to be in the office every day. Tension around her job was a burden accompanied by a certain amount of guilt, and they'd split briefly for just that reason. Whether they could ride future storms remained to be seen. For now, they were committed to working on their relationship. The road was quiet, even for peak season, and she drove over the new bridge and parked in the village centre. Darren's coffee at the Chestnut House was a treat she indulged in when she had the time. Pooley Bridge was a tourist village, with holiday lets and inns taking up most of the real estate. The typical offerings for visitors were catered for by the outdoor shops, bookshops and souvenir vendors. The Chestnut House comprised a small supermarket, stocked with local produce and items that relaxed holidaymakers thought they could afford. Jams, fudge and toffee made in the lakes, wrapped in pretty boxes covered in images of the Wainwright treks. Through the back, they had a daily delivery of pastries, and Kelly considered the odd croissant or pain au chocolat a little morning pick-me-up when she skipped breakfast, like she had this morning. The fact that Lizzie had wanted to play hide-and-seek at 3 o'clock in the morning added to her desperate need for caffeine and sugar, and she'd left Johnny sorting washing, with Lizzie helping by placing pants on her head. Their 11-month-old was as oblivious to her parents' lack of sleep as she was to their fluid gender roles when it came to raising a child. It had just happened that way, and Johnny was equally as comfortable changing nappies as he was saving lost souls on the mountainside. His ego was equipped for being a stay-at-home dad. He knew Kelly went to work for a break. She parked in the village and walked to the Chestnut House, which was always open early for business. The steamers delivered thousands of day trippers throughout the summer, pouring seasonal pounds into the local economy, keeping the residents afloat, even with the bite of rising costs. Kelly did her bit. This morning she felt like buying 2 pastries. "Morning, Kelly." Darren was always chirpy. His face never failed to make her smile, which was much needed in her line of work. She enjoyed speaking to real people who were still alive occasionally. It threw light and shade over her existence. Shelley was busy stacking shelves and shouting questions at Darren from the back. It was a normal weekday morning, despite being peak summer season. "It's gonna be a glorious day," Shelley said, poking her head over a box of toffee. "How will that hold up in this heat?" Kelly asked. The heat wave seemed to have arrived, like a furnace on a dial, 2 weeks ago, and showed no signs of letting up. The reservoirs of the north of England were already worryingly low, including Thirlmere, to the south, which supplied the city of Manchester. Tourists thought it had always been a natural lake, and not the man-made extension of the tiny Wyburn, carved out by the Victorians and run by a cutthroat business for profit that it was. Standing on top of Raven Crag, you'd never guess that it wasn't sculptured by a 4-million-year-old glacier like most of the others, because it was so tastefully done, in keeping with the landscape. A pretty stone bridge ran over it, not dissimilar to the new one at Pooley Bridge, and Kelly had great affection.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?